Docker is a very popular container platform, and like many IT deployments, it's a good idea to monitor what's going on. Now, while you can monitor the host and have alerts sent before resources run out, at some point you'll want to know more details about resources being used by the individual containers. And one way to monitor containers in Docker is to use cAdvisor as the exporter, which will present metrics in a format that Prometheus and Grafana can take advantage of. But how do you install cAdvisor in a Docker container? And how do you configure Prometheus and Grafana to show you what's going on in an easy to view dashboard? Well, if that's something that you're interested in finding out, then stick around and watch this video, because that's what we'll be going over. Now, as this video is about setting up cAdvisor, I'm going to assume you already have Prometheus and Grafana set up. If not, then I do have another video which shows you how to install these in containers in Docker. Now, cAdvisor, which is basically short for Container Advisor, can be run in a container itself. So what we want to do is to set up a container to run cAdvisor, and because I'm using Docker Compose, I'm going to have to edit my Compose file. So to do that, I'm going to be using nano. So running nano, then docker-compose.yml, because this is a YAML file. Now, right at the top, I've got a line about version, which is to do with version compatibility, which it's actually been deprecated, so there's no point keeping that line. I mean, at the moment, I'm just getting warnings about it, but yeah, since it's no longer going to be used going forward, may as well remove it. We've then got our services section here, so I'm just going to go down to the end of there. And then I'm going to copy and paste in the details for this container for cAdvisor. Now, there are better editors than just your basic nano to check alignment and so on, but that looks fine. So what we've got is details for the image we want to use, and we want the latest version of cAdvisor. To make it easy to identify this particular container when we're using command line tools, I'm calling it cAdvisor. Now, one thing I'll particularly point out here is that the port that gets used is 8080, which is basically the same port that the Apache web server uses. So that is a very, very popular port. So you'll want to check all your other containers, anything else that's running on your computer, to see if there's going to be a clash. I mean, most of the other containers that get set up tend to be in the 9,000 range, other than your standard ones that I've been setting up recently of things like Bind and Kia here. But typically they tend to be much higher ports than this, which is to me a bit unusual. Might just be the actual software that's being used here. But again, it's just something to bear in mind, because if you get a clash, then, well, things just won't work. Now, I do want this container to be up and running as often as possible. I would like it to be restarted if it gets stopped, unless I actually manually stop it. In which case, for restart, I'm using unless-stopped instead of always. So that way, if I actually manually stop the container, Docker Compose here won't try to actually restart it. Now, we've then got a series of volumes. So this is basically for the actual container to be able to get access to information that it can then export as metrics. Most of this has actually come from the actual Prometheus website, but I've made some tweaks because I was also having a look on the actual developer website. So one thing I'll point out is that line there for /var/run. For some reason on the Prometheus website, I saw that set to read-write. We're just gathering metrics. If you go to the developers site, on their GitHub page, it's read-only, which to me makes a bit more sense. So I've actually got this set to read-only. And then I've then got this one last line at the bottom here. You'll find that on the developer site, but not on the Prometheus config example. Now, as you'll find later, I'm using a dashboard which doesn't actually do anything to show you anything about disk activity. But all the same, I have included that line just in case, you might want to use it in the future. But that's basically all we need to set up for this actual container. So I'm just going to save that file. So now that our container is actually being defined, it makes sense to start it up and do some initial testing. So what I want to do is going to be a bit selective here when it comes to using Docker Compose. So I'm running Docker Compose up -D because I want the containers to be running in the background. And I'm also putting in the name of the actual container itself. So rather than go through every single actual container and start them up, I'm telling it just to focus on that one specific container. So I'm just going to hit return, and then off it goes, and it should start to actually pull that image down. And then once it's done that, we've just got to wait for the actual process to complete. Well, lo and behold, we can't start the container because, well, something else is already using port 8080. Like I said, it is a very popular port. So the trouble is I can't start this actual container and have it listening on that port because something else is already using it. And I need to find out, well, what actually is using it. So I'm going to have a look at my Docker Compose file. That line only shows up once. So, I mean, I had checked that before, but it's got to be something else on this computer. So what I've done is I've gone back to the actual computer here, but I'm logged in using an account that's got actual privileged access to the actual computer, because what I'm going to do is run a command to find out what's actually listening on that port. So I'm running the command ss with parameters of tunlp, and I'm using sudo privilege rights because I need to find out about other potential users that are running actual applications and so on. So I'm going to hit return, and here it comes back with details about what's listening on what port. And this is what I found. This line right at the end here says rootless port is listening on basically all interfaces using port 8080. It's also interestingly enough on 8443 here. Rootless port, turns out that's Podman. I'm not actually running, well, I can't do it with that user account. Let's double check. Yeah, makes no difference. And this particular user account that I've got doesn't actually get that privilege to see that yet, but this one here, which has got the sudo rights, does, but it's saying there's nothing actually running. Either way, I've got this problem of a clash where Podman itself isn't actually running anything, but it's listening on those two ports. So I've got to come up with a decision here. Do I take Podman out or disable whatever that feature is that's running there? Or do I do something about the actual container? And for me, the easiest thing to do is to just modify the actual container that I've got. So I'm going to edit this compose file, and I'm just going to have to put this onto a different port. So from the container's perspective, it's always going to be listening on port 8080 here, but I'm going to alter it to use port 8081. I mean, there's nothing using that port, so I should be okay doing that. So we'll save that file, and then I'll just run that again and see if that works this time. So there you go. That's at least got that part actual resolved. So what I can then do is just do docker ps, then -l, just to at least find out if this actual container is up and running and it's stable. I mean, all it is just an actual data exporter, so it's just pulling metrics here, so it's not interacting with anything else as such. And yeah, that seems fine. So as long as you get the configuration right, then it should run without issues. So that looks to be working now. So the question now is this actually gathering any information, any metrics before we start getting Prometheus to talk to it? So I'm going to leave it for a bit of a while, and then I'm actually going to check to see what sort of metrics it's pulling. So now that I've left this for a bit of a while, what we can do is use the web browser here to actually check to see if we're getting any metrics. So I'm just going to copy and paste in. I'm just going to put in the IP address here for the actual host itself. And because I'm now having to use port 8081, in other words, the container's still running an application listening on port 8080, but to the outside world, the host's presenting that as 8081, so that's why I'm using that as the port. And it's just basic HTTP that we're using. There's no encryption going on. But if I hit return, what we then get back is actually quite a useful bit of information here just through this web browser. It's actually very useful, to be honest. I mean, there is still the process of setting up Prometheus and Grafana and so on, but even just for a basic like overview of actually what's going on the actual computer, there's a lot of information here. I mean, like a lot. I mean, it's picking up information about Docker containers here, which you'll see. It's even noticed the fact that Podman's on as well. I mean, I select Podman, it's nothing there. I'm not actually running anything at the minute, but it's giving me details about that. So yeah, I mean, you could just drill down into all this sort of stuff and get overviews about what it's up to there, the processors, CPU utilization, memory utilization, network throughput, the files that are involved. It's very, very detailed, and you're getting all this through like the actual web browser here. So yeah, I do find it extremely useful. But really what we want to do is to hand this over to Prometheus and Grafana. Well, now that cAdvisor is up and running and we can see metrics from it, the next thing to do is to configure Prometheus to actually regularly collect those. So what I need to do is to edit the config file for Prometheus. So the file is prometheus.yml. For me, it's in a folder that I've called Prometheus. I'm going to use nano to edit that. And what I need to do is to add a new job under this scrape_config section here. To set up a new job to go and talk to cAdvisor. So I'm just going to copy and paste these details here. So all I've done is given this a name of cAdvisor, and then I just need to point it to cAdvisor, which for me, I'm just using the IP address of the actual host. And just to point out, I'm using port 8081 here. I had to change it because of the clash. Podman was already using that port 8080, so I've had to present this to the outside world as 8081 instead. So just something to bear in mind if you have a look at this on this actual video session here, is that if you're using port 8080 still, yeah, you'll still want to use port 8080 here within the config of Prometheus. So I'll just save that change. Now, because Prometheus is running as a container for me, my choices are to restart the actual container, simply because although we've changed the config file, the changes don't take effect immediately. If I reload the actual container, it'll pick up the new configuration and then it'll start talking to cAdvisor. But you do have the actual option to configure Prometheus so that you can actually send it a command and tell it to reload the configuration itself. So you just run this curl command if you've actually set Prometheus up that way. Then you're just basically sending in a reload command. So I'm just going to hit return, and that should get Prometheus to read the actual configuration file, and then that should get it talking to cAdvisor. But the way it's been set up, it's just using the default global settings. So it's going to take at least a minute before it's actually going to be able to gather anything from cAdvisor. So I'm just going to leave it a short while, and then we'll just go and check on the status after. Well, now that I've waited a while, I just want to check the connectivity between Prometheus and cAdvisor, just to make sure that it can actually talk to it. So I'm just going to open up a new tab. And then what I'm going to do is just copy and paste in the URL that I've got for Prometheus here. So it listens on port 9090. Hit return, takes us to the main page. But what I want to do is go to status and then targets, which is basically a list of all of the actual jobs that we've got configured for it to run. Now, I do keep forgetting that, yeah, the ordering that you see here isn't the actual ordering that you've got in your config file. So I mean, I was going to the end here and looking for cAdvisor because it was put right at the end of the file, and it's like nowhere to be seen. Reason being is it's right up here. All of this is in alphabetical order, so that's just something to bear in mind. But the good news for me is cAdvisor, it's saying it's up. It's only got one actual endpoint here anyway, so that's why it's saying 1 of 1. But status is up. I mean, it even gives me the option to actually click on that same URL that it's using to connect to cAdvisor. It gives me details of when it last actually ran a scrape, how long it actually took, and so on. But ultimately, what we want to do is to hand this off to Grafana. Well, now that Prometheus is gathering all of that information regularly, we want to be able to actually present that in a more useful form for us, and that's where Grafana comes in. Now, the good thing about Grafana is it lets you actually create your own dashboards, but even better, there's a community out there who actually create dashboards and they make them available to the public, so that can save you quite a bit of time. So we're over on this Grafana dashboards page here, and you can then sift through all of the different dashboards available. So what I've done is I've just put in a filter option here to look for any dashboard that's got Docker in the name, basically, because I'm interested in Docker containers, for instance. By default, what it's going to do, it's then going to sort them based on the actual number of downloads, in other words, the most popular ones. But I'm more concerned about dashboards actually being created and then becoming obsolete. I want really a dashboard that's being maintained ideally. So for that reason, I've changed the sort by option to last updated. So again, it's a case of then going through these to find out what seems useful for you. Now, what I found is this one here, Docker cAdvisor. So if I click on that, it gives me some idea of what we're going to get out of this, which is basically information about CPU utilization, memory utilization. So that looks good for me from a top level perspective. Last update, it seems, was around about 18th of June 2024. So for me, it's pretty much up to date. So I do like that. So that's the actual dashboard we're going to use. And the good thing, what you can do is you can actually copy the ID here to the clipboard to make your life a lot easier. So I'm just going to do that. Then over on my actual connection to Grafana, I'm going to click on the actual menu here, click on dashboards. I've only got one at the moment here, but I'm going to click on new over here and select import. And then what I can do is just paste in the actual ID for this actual dashboard, click on load. And then what you can do is you can, if you want, you can make changes, so you can rename it. So for now, I'm just going to leave this as is, but I do need to make sure that I select the actual data source, which is Prometheus here. Then click on import. And now it's actually showing me the actual metrics, and it's breaking it down into the actual individual containers here in terms of CPU utilization. I mean, at the moment it's showing all, but you can filter it out if you want. I mean, I can pick out a specific one and it only shows me details about that one. But I'm just thinking from a top level perspective, I'd like to see what they're all up to. So with this dashboard, what I'm seeing is the CPU utilization that's going on, memory use, how much cached memory is going on, how much received network traffic there is, how much sent traffic is. So it's not showing me any information about the disks, for instance, which at this stage of the game I'm not overly concerned about really. I'm more concerned about something goes with the computer where CPU is too high or memory is running out. That's typically the problem. In which case then I've got to then work out, well, is it a container? If so, which of the containers is using up the most resources? Which one is the one causing me the problem? And this for me is a very useful way to be able to filter it out and see what each individual container is up to. But yeah, it's pretty easy to set up, I'd say. And I do like the fact that you can get access then pretty quickly to an easy dashboard like this one. Now, if you find this video to be useful, then do consider subscribing to the channel, as that would really mean a lot to me. But it's also a good indicator to let me know how videos like this are helpful to people such as yourself that are watching. In which case, thank you. On the other hand, if you're not ready for that level of commitment, then I'd really appreciate it if you could press the like button, because that that'll help to get the video out to other people that might find it useful as well.